It took Ilhan Omar exactly 14 seconds to make the fatal mistake of condescending to someone who speaks at 300 words per minute and thinks even faster. 14 seconds. That's all it took. 14 seconds of smug confidence, of assuming that rapid speech indicates shallow thinking, of believing that dismissive condescension could substitute for actual argumentation. 14 seconds that would end a political career. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me paint the picture, because the context makes the destruction so much sweeter. It was billed as the debate of the decade, America's future. Capitalism versus socialism. Prime time on a major network. The production value was massive. Professional lighting, multiple camera angles, a studio audience of over 500 people split evenly between progressives and conservatives. This wasn't some YouTube live stream or cable news shouting match. This was a serious, nationally televised event designed to actually explore fundamental questions about America's economic and political future. On one side, Ilhan Omar, the Somali-born congresswoman from Minnesota's 5th District, member of the Squad, darling of the progressive left, Time magazine cover subject, the woman who'd become the face of a new, bold, democratic socialism. She arrived with an entourage, Squad members in the front row of the audience, progressive activists filling their half of the room, all wearing their political allegiances literally on their sleeves, with various socialist slogans and social justice messages. On the other side, Ben Shapiro, conservative commentator, podcast host, Harvard Law graduate, former violin prodigy, the man known for debating college students into submission and speaking so quickly that YouTube videos of him come with a warning that he's already on 1.5x speed. He arrived alone, carrying several thick research binders, wearing a suit and his yarmulke, looking like he was preparing for a legal brief rather than a television debate. The moderator, a veteran journalist with 30 years of experience, laid out the format. Each person would get a 10-minute opening statement, then 90 minutes of free-form debate with minimal intervention. The only rules? No personal attacks on family members, and each person had to let the other finish their sentences without interruption. Omar went first. Her opening statement was polished, clearly rehearsed. She talked about coming to America as a refugee, about the struggles of working families, about the need for bold, transformative change. She invoked FDR and the New Deal, talked about how democratic socialism had succeeded in Scandinavia, painted a vision of an America where healthcare and education were guaranteed rights, where the wealthy paid their fair share, where justice was economic as well as social. It was effective. Her supporters applauded enthusiastically. Even some conservatives in the audience looked thoughtful. Then it was Shapiro's turn. He spoke about capitalism lifting billions out of poverty, about how free markets create prosperity, while socialism creates misery, about the moral case for individual liberty and limited government. He cited statistics, referenced history, quoted economists. He spoke quickly, not because he was nervous, but because he had a lot of ground to cover and limited time. His supporters applauded equally enthusiastically. Then came the Q&A portion. Shapiro got to ask the first question. "Congresswoman," he began, speaking at his characteristic rapid pace, "you've advocated for a Green New Deal that the Congressional Budget Office estimates would cost $93 trillion over 10 years. That's roughly 4 times the entire current U.S. GDP. You've also supported Medicare for All, which would cost an additional $32 trillion. That's $125 trillion in new spending. The entire wealth of all U.S. billionaires combined is approximately $5 trillion. Even if we confiscated, not taxed, confiscated, every penny from every billionaire, we'd still be $120 trillion short. So my question is simple. Where does the money come from? How do you pay for this? What's the actual math? It was a straightforward question, a policy question, a math question. The kind of question any serious politician should be able to answer. Omar smiled. Not a friendly smile. A condescending smile. The smile of someone who thinks they're about to deliver a devastating put-down. "Ben," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Maybe if you spoke slower and thought deeper instead of rapid-fire talking points, you'd understand the complexity beyond your simplistic worldview. These are nuanced policy questions that require more than surface-level analysis. Perhaps if you engaged with the actual substance instead of reducing everything to sound bites, you'd grasp what we're actually proposing." The audience gasped. Even her supporters looked a bit uncomfortable. That was personal, not policy. Shapiro's expression didn't change, but anyone who knew him, anyone who'd watched hours of his debates, recognized what was happening. He set down his pen with deliberate care. He adjusted his glasses. He looked directly at Omar, and he smiled. That smile, the smile that meant someone had just made a catastrophic tactical error. "Congresswoman," he said, his voice still rapid, but now with an edge of barely controlled intensity. "I appreciate the speed critique. I speak quickly because I have a lot of facts to cover and limited time. But since you prefer a slower pace, let me accommodate you. I'll take my time. I'll walk through your record very carefully, one documented fact at a time." He opened his research binders, and they were stuffed full. Tabs, highlighted sections, sticky notes, the works. "I've got 90 minutes and approximately 47,000 words worth of material. So let's begin slowly, deeply, with all the nuance and complexity you claim I'm missing. Because, Congresswoman, when we're done here tonight, everyone watching is going to understand exactly who you are, what you've done, and why you're fundamentally unfit to serve in the United States Congress." He looked directly into the camera. If you're watching at home, what you're about to witness is what happens when ideology meets evidence, when confidence meets competence, when someone who speaks quickly but thinks clearly dismantles someone who speaks slowly but doesn't think at all. This is going to be educational. Stay with me. The moderator tried to regain control, but Shapiro held up a hand. "Congresswoman Omar opened this door by questioning my thinking process. So let's think deeply about her record, starting with something simple. Her marriages." And that's when the massacre began. Shapiro pulled out the first section of his research, and his tone became almost friendly, the way a prosecutor sounds when they're about to spring a trap. "Let's start with something that requires deep thinking. Let's talk about your marriages, Congresswoman, because I'm confused. And when I'm confused, I slow down and examine the evidence, so bear with me while I think deeply about your marital history." He pulled out a timeline, had it displayed on screens around the studio. "In 2002, you entered into a faith-based marriage with Ahmed Hirsi, not legally married, just religiously according to Islamic tradition. You had 2 children with him. Beautiful family. Then, in 2008, you divorced him. Except, and here's where my simple mind gets confused, you can't legally divorce someone you were never legally married to. But let's not get caught up in technicalities." Shapiro's pace was still measured, almost conversational. "Then, in 2009, you legally married Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi. This is where things get interesting. Multiple credible sources, including birth records from Somalia, immigration documents, school records, and testimony from members of your own Somali American community in Minneapolis, indicate that Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi is your brother, your biological brother. The audience erupted in murmurs. Omar's face went red. Shapiro held up a hand for silence. Now I know what you're thinking. That's been debunked. That's a conspiracy theory. Except it hasn't been debunked. Let me lay out the evidence piece by piece, and you tell me if I'm thinking deeply enough. He pulled out documents, displaying them on screen. Birth records from Somalia, admittedly difficult to verify given the country's instability, but they exist, show Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi and Ilhan Omar sharing the same father's name, Noor Saeed Elmi Mohammed. Immigration documents show both of you entering the United States with the same family. School records from Minneapolis show you in the same household during your teenage years. There are photos, before you deleted them from social media, showing you and Elmi together as children with family members. Shapiro looked up from his documents. Now, Congresswoman, you've called these allegations disgusting lies, conspiracy theories, and Islamophobic smears. But here's what you haven't done. You haven't provided any evidence that Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi is not your brother. You haven't explained why you married him. You haven't addressed any of the actual evidence. You've just attacked people who ask the questions. He pulled out more documents, his pace beginning to accelerate. But let's hypothetically say, that despite all this evidence, Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi is not your brother. Okay, fine. Then who is he? Why did you marry him? Because here's what we know for certain. Not alleged, but documented by the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board. While you were legally married to Elmi, you filed joint tax returns with Hersey. Shapiro paused for effect. Let me repeat that slowly, so we're all thinking deeply about this. You were legally married to Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi, but you filed joint tax returns with Ahmed Hersey, your former faith-based husband. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's not Islamophobia. That's tax fraud. The state of Minnesota confirmed this. You paid back taxes. You paid penalties. This is documented fact. He turned to face her directly. So, let's think really deeply about this situation. If Elmi is your brother, you committed immigration fraud by marrying him to get him citizenship or other immigration benefits. If he's not your brother, then the only logical explanation for why you'd marry him while living with and filing taxes with a different man is immigration fraud. Different details, same crime. Either way, you're looking at a federal felony that carries a 5-year prison sentence. Omar tried to interrupt. I'm not done, Shapiro said firmly. You wanted me to think deeply, so let me finish my thought. You divorced Elmi in 2017, conveniently right before you announced your run for Congress. Interesting timing, don't you think? Almost like you were cleaning up loose ends before entering public life. He pulled out timeline documents. And through all of this, when legitimate questions are raised about potential federal crimes, you don't answer. You deflect. You claim victimhood. You hide behind your identity. They're attacking me because I'm Muslim, because I'm black, because I'm a woman. No, Congresswoman. People are asking because the evidence suggests you may have committed serious crimes. Shapiro's voice rose in intensity, his words coming faster now. So, here are your options. Let's think deeply about each one. Option A. You married your brother to commit immigration fraud. Federal felony, 5 years in prison. Option B. You married someone else for immigration benefits, which is the exact same federal felony with the exact same penalty. Option C. You're so incompetent or confused about your own marital status that you accidentally committed tax fraud. which suggests a level of dysfunction that disqualifies you from making national policy. Which is it? He leaned forward. Because I don't want to answer that isn't option D. Facts don't care about your feelings, Congresswoman. Immigration law doesn't care about your deflection. And the American people deserve to know if their Congresswoman is a federal criminal. So, which option is it? Silence. Omar sat frozen, unable or unwilling to answer. Shapiro gathered his papers. If you're watching at home, and you think elected officials should answer basic questions about potentially committing federal crimes, share this everywhere. Tell everyone you know. Because we're just getting started. And it gets worse, much worse. He turned back to Omar. Now, let's talk about something else that requires deep thinking. Your relationship with the Jewish people. Because, Congresswoman, as an Orthodox Jew who wears a yarmulke on national television, I have some thoughts about your anti-Semitism. The energy in the room had completely shifted. Omar's supporters were quiet now, no longer cheering. Shapiro's supporters sensed blood in the water. The moderator tried to intervene to move to a different topic, but Shapiro was having none of it. No, this is important. This is exactly the kind of deep thinking the Congresswoman wanted. So, let's think deeply about bigotry. He pulled out a compilation of tweets and statements, all enlarged on the studio screens. February 10, 2019. Glenn Greenwald tweets, GOP leader Kevin McCarthy threatens punishment for Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib over their criticisms of Israel. It's stunning how much time U.S. political leaders spend defending a foreign nation. You respond, it's all about the Benjamin's baby, with a music note emoji. Shapiro looked up. For those who need me to slow down and explain, Benjamin's refers to Benjamin Franklin, whose face is on the $100 bill. You were directly invoking the anti-Semitic trope that Jews control politics through money, that American politicians only support Israel because they're being paid off. This is a classic anti-Semitic canard that's been used to justify Jewish persecution for centuries. He pulled out historical examples, displayed them on screen. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a fabricated anti-Semitic text from the early 1900s that claimed Jews secretly controlled world governments through money, used by the Nazis to justify the Holocaust. Your tweet echoed this exact conspiracy theory. When called out by Democrats and Republicans alike, you issued a non-apology apology. You said you didn't mean it that way, that you were just criticizing IPAC. Then you did it again. Shapiro read from another tweet, his pace accelerating. March 2019. You tweeted about allegiance to a foreign country, suggesting that supporters of Israel have dual loyalty. This is another classic anti-Semitic trope. The idea that Jews can't be trusted because we're more loyal to Israel than to our own countries. This accusation has been used to persecute Jews for literally thousands of years. It was used to justify the Dreyfus Affair in France. It was used by Stalin to purge Jews from the Soviet government. And you used it on Twitter. He didn't wait for a response, pulling out more evidence. But wait, there's more. In 2012, before you were in Congress, you tweeted, Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. Hypnotize the world. The idea that Jews have mystical powers to control and deceive people. This is medieval blood libel updated for the social media age. Shapiro's voice became more personal now, more intense. Now, let me explain something as an Orthodox Jew, as someone who has faced actual anti-Semitism. These aren't just words. These aren't just political disagreements about Israeli policy. These are dangerous, bigoted statements that have real-world consequences. He pulled out hate crime statistics. Since you took office in January 2019, anti-Semitic incidents in America have increased by 61%. Synagogue shootings, Jewish cemeteries vandalized, Jews attacked on the streets of New York for wearing kippahs or traditional Orthodox clothing. Now, I'm not saying you personally pulled any triggers or spray-painted any swastikas, but when a member of Congress normalizes anti-Semitic language, when you mainstream these ancient hatreds, you create an environment where bigotry flourishes. Omar tried to interrupt. I have Jewish friends, Shapiro cut her off, his voice sharp. That's your defense, the oldest defense of bigots everywhere. Let me tell you something about your Jewish friends. If they actually exist and aren't just tokenized to shield you from accountability, they don't speak for all Jews. And the fact that some Jews are willing to ignore or excuse your anti-Semitism doesn't make it not anti-Semitism. He pulled out a congressional resolution, held it up. Your own party was so embarrassed by your bigotry that they had to pass a resolution condemning anti-Semitism. The House of Representatives, controlled by your own party, felt compelled to publicly rebuke you because your statements were so obviously anti-Semitic. And how did you respond? By playing the victim. By claiming you were being attacked for being Muslim. Shapiro's voice rose with righteous anger. No, Congresswoman, you're not being attacked for being Muslim. I defend the religious liberty of Muslims. I've consistently opposed actual Islamophobia. I've condemned attacks on Muslim Americans. This isn't about your religion. This is about your bigotry. This is about you using language that for 2,000 years has been used to justify Jewish persecution, expulsion, and murder. This is about you targeting the world's only Jewish state with accusations you level at no other country. He pulled out her voting record on international issues. You support BDS, boycott, divest, sanction against Israel. You want to economically strangle the only democracy in the Middle East, the only country in the region where Muslims, Christians, Jews, Druze, Baha'i, and atheists all have equal rights under law. The only country with a free press, free elections, an independent judiciary, gay rights, women's rights. His pace reached maximum velocity now, words tumbling out with precision. Meanwhile, you're silent on China's genocide of Uyghur Muslims, silent on Iran hanging homosexuals from cranes, silent on Saudi Arabia's oppression of women, silent on Syria's use of chemical weapons, silent on Hamas using children as human shields, silent on the Palestinian Authority paying the families of terrorists. The only country you consistently attack, the only country you want to economically destroy, is the Jewish state. And you want me to believe that's not anti-Semitism? You want me to think that's just legitimate criticism of Israeli policy? He walked toward her position, his voice becoming deadly serious. Let me think really deeply about this pattern, Congresswoman. You use the Benjamins trope, Jewish money controlling politics. You use the dual loyalty trope, Jews can't be trusted. You use the hypnosis trope, Jews deceiving the world. You support BDS against the Jewish state while ignoring actual human rights catastrophes. You compare Israel, a democracy, to Hamas, a terrorist organization. And when called out, you hide behind your identity and claim victimhood. Shapiro stopped directly in front of her. Here's my deep thought. You're a bigot. You traffic in anti-Semitism, and you use your identity as a Muslim woman of color as a shield to avoid accountability for your hatred. That's not complexity. That's not nuance. That's just old-fashioned bigotry with better PR. He returned to his position. Facts don't care about your feelings about Jews. History doesn't care about your excuses. And every Jewish American who's felt less safe since you took office deserves better than a congresswoman who normalizes the same hatred that led to the Holocaust. He looked into the camera. If you stand with Israel, if you stand against anti-Semitism in all its forms, if you believe bigotry is bigotry regardless of who expresses it, share this everywhere. Because we're about to discuss something even worse. What she said about September 11th. The studio was absolutely silent now. Even Omar's staunchest supporters sensed that something fundamental had shifted. Shapiro's methodical, evidence-based destruction of her record was unlike anything they'd expected. This wasn't shouting or theatrics. This was systematic annihilation through documentation. Shapiro's tone shifted, became slower and more somber. Congresswoman, we're going to speak very slowly now, very carefully, because we're about to discuss the worst terrorist attack in American history. September 11th, 2001. You were 18 years old. I was 17. I remember exactly where I was when the towers fell. Do you? He pulled out a transcript of her care speech. March 23, 2019. You gave a speech to the Council on American Islamic Relations. You said, and I'm reading your exact words, KER was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. Shapiro paused, letting the words hang in the air. Some people did something. That's how you described September 11th. Some people did something. Not terrorists attacked us, not Islamic extremists murdered Americans, not we were attacked. Some people did something. He looked up from the transcript, his voice thick with barely controlled emotion. Let me speak very slowly, so we can all think deeply about what some people did on September 11th, 2001. They hijacked American Airlines Flight 11 and flew it into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. They hijacked United Airlines Flight 175 and flew it into the South Tower. They hijacked American Airlines Flight 77 and flew it into the Pentagon. They tried to hijack United Airlines Flight 93, but the passengers fought back and the plane crashed in Pennsylvania instead of hitting the Capitol or the White House. Shapiro pulled out photos, the towers burning, people jumping, the collapse, the aftermath. Those some people murdered 2,977 souls. They burned people alive in office buildings. They forced people to make the choice between burning to death or jumping 90 stories. They murdered firefighters running into buildings to save people. They murdered first responders. They murdered office workers, tourists, pilots, flight attendants. They murdered people because they were American. His voice was rising now, faster, more intense. Captain Patrick Brown, FDNY Ladder 3, father of 3, ran into the South Tower when everyone else was running out. The building collapsed on him. Some person killed him. Wells Crowther, the man in the red bandana, 24 years old, saved dozens of people by leading them to safety. Going back into the burning tower again and again. Died when it collapsed. Some person killed him. Todd Beamer, Flight 93. Let's Roll led the passenger revolt that crashed the plane in a field instead of into the Capitol. Some person killed him. Shapiro pulled out the full list of victims, all 2,987 names. I could read every single name, every single person who died that day. But we don't have time, because there are too many Americans murdered by some people who did something. Except they weren't some people, Congresswoman. They were Islamic terrorists. 19 men who pledged allegiance to Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. They weren't anonymous. They weren't generic. They were Islamic extremists who murdered Americans in the name of jihad. He looked directly at her. Can you say that? Can you say Islamic terrorists murdered 2,987 Americans on September 11, 2001? Can you condemn it clearly, unequivocally, without minimizing, without hedging, without immediately pivoting to Islamophobia? Silence. Omar refused to answer. You can't, can you? Shapiro said quietly. And that's the problem. You've never been able to clearly condemn Islamic terrorism, ever. Let me show you the pattern. He pulled out more documents, his pace accelerating again. You opposed designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, even though the Muslim Brotherhood has ties to Hamas and has been involved in terrorism across the Middle East. You're the only member of Congress who voted against a resolution recognizing the Armenian genocide, 1.5 million Christians systematically murdered by the Ottoman Empire, because Turkey, an Islamic nation, didn't want it recognized. You've compared Israel defending itself from terrorist attacks to terrorism itself. You've consistently voted against measures to strengthen counterterrorism efforts. Shapiro pulled out a video, played it on the studio screens. This is you in July 2019 speaking to a Somali-American audience in Minnesota. You're speaking in Somali, probably thinking most Americans wouldn't bother to get it translated, but we did. You said, professional translation. We are people who know they are Somali and Muslim first. He paused. Let that sink in. Somali and Muslim first, not American. You told your supporters that their primary identity, their primary loyalty, is to Somalia and Islam, not to the United States. Not to the country that took you in as a refugee, that gave you safety, education, opportunity, a seat in Congress. Shapiro's voice became sharp, prosecutorial. So, let me think deeply about this pattern, Congresswoman. You minimize 9/11 to some people did something. You can't clearly condemn Islamic terrorism. You oppose recognizing genocide when it offends Islamic nations. You vote against counterterrorism measures. You use anti-Semitic language about Jews and Israel. You tell Somali audiences you're Somali and Muslim first, not American first. And when Americans question where your loyalties lie, you claim Islamophobia and victimhood. He walked toward her. Here's what deep thinking tells me. You don't actually think of yourself as American. You came here as a refugee from a failed state torn apart by Islamic extremism and clan warfare. America gave you everything. We saved your life. We gave you safety, education, opportunity. We gave you a chance to serve in Congress. And you've repaid that by attacking American values, minimizing American tragedies, using bigoted language about America's allies, and making crystal clear that your primary loyalty is to Somalia and Islam, not to America. Shapiro's voice filled with passion. I'm not questioning your right to be Muslim. I defend religious liberty for everyone. I'm not questioning your right to maintain cultural connections to Somalia. But I am absolutely questioning whether you should be representing Americans in Congress when you've made it abundantly clear that Americans are not your first priority. When you can't even bring yourself to clearly condemn the people who murdered 2,977 of us. He returned to his position, pulled out more evidence. Facts don't care about your feelings about 9/11. The fact is that Islamic terrorists murdered Americans. The fact is, you minimized it as some people did something. The fact is, you've never clearly condemned Islamic terrorism. The fact is, you told Somalis you are Somali first, not American. Those are facts, Congresswoman. and no amount of crying Islamophobia makes them go away. He looked into the camera. If you remember where you were on September 11th, if those 2,977 Americans matter to you, if you think some people did something is a disgrace, share this everywhere. Let everyone know, because we're about to discuss how she turned her campaign into a family enrichment scheme. Omar was visibly shaken now. Her confidence from the beginning of the debate had completely evaporated. She'd expected a policy debate, maybe some heated exchanges about socialism versus capitalism. She hadn't expected a systematic evisceration of her entire record, backed by documents, and delivered with the relentless pace of someone who'd done his homework. Shapiro pulled out a new set of binders, these ones marked with bright red tabs. Now, let's talk about something that requires really deep thinking. Arithmetic. Specifically, the arithmetic of how you turned your political campaign into a family enrichment scheme while preaching about corporate greed and corruption. He opened to the first section, spoke with exaggerated slowness. Your husband, Tim Minette, runs a consulting firm called the E Street Group. Am I speaking slowly enough? Let's think deeply about this. The pace returned to normal Shapiro velocity. Over the past 4 years, your campaign has paid Tim Minette's E Street Group $6,000. Let me say that again because it's a big number. $2,176,000. Now, I know you wanted me to think deeply, so let me break this down. That's more than you paid your entire campaign staff combined. Your husband's firm made more money from your campaign than 15 actual employees working full-time. For what services, exactly? He pulled out FEC filings, displayed them on screen. The filings say consulting services, digital strategy, travel arrangements, fundraising consulting. Very vague, very general. So, I had my team investigate what the E Street Group actually delivered for $2.8 million. You know what we found? Nothing. No portfolio. No documented deliverables. No case studies. No testimonials from any clients except your campaign. Just $2.8 million in payments to your husband for services that nobody can actually identify. Shapiro flipped through pages rapidly. But it gets better or worse, depending on your perspective. You married Tim Minette in March 2020, but the payments to his firm started in 2018, back when he was married to someone else. And you were married to someone else. His ex-wife filed for divorce in August 2019, citing an affair with you. She literally named you in the divorce filing as the other woman. He looked up, all innocence. So, just to make sure I'm thinking deeply enough, you hired your future husband's consulting firm. Then you started an affair with him while you were both married to other people. Then you both got divorced from your respective spouses. Then you married each other. And through all of this, you kept paying his firm hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign funds. And now you're paying even more. Does that about sum it up? Omar started to respond. The payments were for legitimate services that nobody can document, Shapiro interrupted. Let me tell you what legitimate services look like. A consulting firm that does legitimate work has a portfolio. They have case studies. They have testimonials. They can point to specific deliverables and say, we did this, and here's the result. Your husband's firm has none of that. Just $2.8 million from your campaign and nothing to show for it, except that you're now married to him. He pulled out the House Ethics Committee report. And I'm not the only one who noticed this. The House Ethics Committee, your colleagues, your own party, investigated your campaign finances. They found that you may have violated House rules by using campaign funds for personal purposes. Very diplomatic language, very gentle. But the finding was clear. You used campaign money to enrich your family. Shapiro read from the report. The committee determined that payments to the E Street Group were impermissible personal use of campaign funds because they primarily benefited you and your husband rather than the campaign. The recommended penalty? You paid a $3,469 fine. Let me think deeply about that math. You made $2.8 million in questionable payments. You settled for a $3,469 fine. That's 0.100% of the amount in question. That's not justice. That's a parking ticket for robbing a bank. He pulled out additional expense reports. But wait, let's think even more deeply. Let's look at how your campaign spends money in general. Campaign finance reports show over $310,000 spent on luxury hotels and high-end restaurants over 2 years. Strategy dinners at restaurants where the cheapest entree is $70. Team meals that cost thousands of dollars. 5-star hotels when Holiday Inns exist. First-class airfare when coach would work fine. Shapiro read from specific expense reports, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Here's a good one. Team dinner, per se, $1,147. For those who don't know, Per se is one of the most expensive restaurants in New York. The tasting menu costs $350 per person before wine. You spent almost $2,000 on one dinner for your team. Meanwhile, the average household income in your district is $59,000 per year. Your one dinner cost more than many of your constituents make in 3 weeks. He flipped through more pages. Here's another. Strategy retreat, luxury resort. $47,000 for one weekend for your staff. That's more than your constituents make in a year. Travel expenses, first-class airfare, $89,000 in 1 year. Accommodations, 5-star hotels, $124,000 over 2 years. All while you preach about income inequality and attack wealthy people for their excess. Shapiro closed the binder with a dramatic thump. So let me think really, really deeply about this pattern. You turned your campaign into a family business by paying your husband's firm millions. You lived a luxury lifestyle on campaign funds. You spent more on one dinner than many Americans spend on groceries in a month. When caught by the ethics committee, you paid a meaningless fine and kept doing it. And through all of this, you lectured Americans about greed, corruption, and the need to tax the rich. His voice became sharp, cutting. That's not democratic socialism, Congresswoman. That's old-fashioned corruption with better branding. That's using donor money from people who believed in you, who thought they were supporting a movement as your personal ATM machine. That's enriching your family while preaching about economic justice. That's hypocrisy so blatant, so shameless, that even your own party had to investigate you. He pulled out one more document. And here's the kicker. After the Ethics Committee investigation, after the fine, after the bad publicity, you know what you did? You kept paying your husband's firm over $600,000 in additional payments since the investigation closed. Because apparently, paying a tiny fine is just the cost of doing business when you're converting campaign donations into family income. Shapiro looked directly at her. Facts don't care about your feelings about campaign finance law. The law says you can't use campaign funds to enrich family members. You did it anyway. You got caught. You paid a meaningless fine, and you're still doing it. That's not thinking deeply, Congresswoman. That's thinking you're above the law. He turned to the camera. If you're tired of politicians who treat campaign funds like family bank accounts, if you believe in actual accountability, If you think a $3,500 fine for $2.8 million in questionable payments is a joke, share this, because we're about to talk about another disastrous policy she championed: defunding police. By this point, even some of Omar's supporters in the audience were looking uncomfortable. The documented evidence was overwhelming. The pattern was undeniable, and Shapiro showed no signs of slowing down. He pulled out a new section, and his expression became more serious. Let's think deeply about public safety, Congresswoman, specifically about your campaign to defund police departments, and what happened to the people who actually listened to you. He displayed photos from 2020 protests, Summer 2020, Black Lives Matter protests, calls to defund the police. And you were right there leading the charge, not just tweeting about it, actively organizing for it, marching for it, making it your signature issue. Let me show you some of your statements. Shapiro read from a compilation of her tweets and speeches. Defunding police means defunding police. That's you. Direct quote. We can and should reduce the police budget. That's you. Police departments are inherently violent and oppressive institutions. Also, you. We need to completely reimagine public safety. Guess who said that? These aren't out of context. These are your positions, your advocacy, your policy goals. He pulled out before and after crime statistics. And some cities listened to you, Congresswoman. Minneapolis, your backyard, voted to dismantle the police department after activists like you championed it. Let's think deeply about what happened next. Shapiro read the statistics, but presented them as stories. In 2019, before the defund movement, Minneapolis had 48 murders. In 2020, after the council voted to defund, that number jumped to 82. That's not just statistics. That's 34 additional families who lost someone. That's 34 funerals. That's 34 lives ended because the police force was gutted. He continued, pace increasing. Carjackings increased 537%. 537%. Let me say that slower so we can think deeply about what that means. You were 5 times more likely to have your car stolen at gunpoint after defund policies took effect. Violent crime increased 22%. Businesses fled downtown because it wasn't safe. Response times tripled because there weren't enough officers. Shapiro pulled out testimony from Minneapolis residents. Let me read you some thoughts from people who actually live with the consequences of your ideas. This is from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune letters to the editor section. He read several letters, his voice becoming more emotional. I supported defund because it sounded good. Now my son was beaten and robbed, and police took 45 minutes to arrive. I was wrong. My business was vandalized 3 times. Each time, police couldn't respond for over an hour. I'm closing after 30 years. I'm a black woman who marched for BLM. Now I'm terrified to leave my house after dark. This isn't justice. Shapiro set down the letters. But it's not just Minneapolis. Every major city that reduced police budgets saw similar results. New York cut police funding after activists like you demanded it. Let's think deeply about what happened there. He pulled out NYPD crime statistics. Murders up 47%. That's 218 more people killed in 1 year. Shootings doubled from 777 to 1,531. Grand larceny up 66%. Burglaries up 42%. Hate crimes surged. Attacks on Asian Americans, attacks on Jews, attacks on anyone vulnerable. The city became measurably, significantly more dangerous because of policies you championed. Shapiro pulled out a letter, held it up. This is from Carmen Ramirez. Her 19-year-old son, Marcus, was shot and killed in the Bronx during a robbery. She called 911 at 10:47 p.m. Police arrived at 11:10 p.m., 23 minutes. Before the budget cuts, average response time in her neighborhood was 8 minutes. Her son bled out waiting for help that came too late because there weren't enough officers. His voice became hard, angry. Marcus Ramirez is dead because of your ideas, Congresswoman. Because you championed policies that gutted police departments without thinking through the consequences. Because you cared more about slogans than safety. Because defund the police sounded good to activists and college students who don't live in high-crime neighborhoods. He pulled out security expenditure reports. But here's where the thinking needs to get really deep. While you were defunding police for regular Americans, how much did taxpayers spend protecting you? Capitol Police Protection. $387,000 in 2021 alone. NYPD security detail when you visit New York. Another $120,000 per year. Over $500,000 in public funds protecting you while you strip protection from everyone else. Shapiro displayed security request logs. And you haven't just accepted that protection passively. You've requested additional security 17 times in 2 years. For protesters outside your office, for angry tweets, for online threats. Every time you feel unsafe, you ask for more police protection. His voice rose with righteous indignation. So, let me make sure I'm thinking deeply enough about this hypocrisy. When you're scared, you get armed police officers. When Carmen Ramirez's son was being murdered, he got a 23-minute response time. When you face online harassment, you get Capitol Police. When David Chen's grocery store was being robbed for the 3rd time, he got a recording saying officers weren't available. You get $500,000 in security. Working-class people in high-crime neighborhoods get longer response times and fewer officers. Shapiro walked toward her. That's not criminal justice reform, Congresswoman. That's not reimagining public safety. That's aristocracy. That's you living behind armed guards while the people you represent die waiting for police to arrive. That's you demanding protection for yourself while taking it away from everyone else. And Marcus Ramirez paid the price with his life. He returned to his position. Facts don't care about your feelings about policing. The fact is, crime surged everywhere. Defund policies were implemented. The fact is, people died because police couldn't respond quickly enough. The fact is, you kept your security while championing policies that got people killed. Those are facts, Congresswoman. Documented, undeniable facts. He looked into the camera. If rising crime has affected you or someone you love, if you believe in equal protection under law, if you think Marcus Ramirez deserved better than being a sacrifice to political ideology, share this everywhere. Because we're about to tie it all together and explain why this woman should not be in Congress. The debate had long since stopped being a debate. This was a dismantling, a systematic, documented, evidence-based destruction of everything Ilhan Omar claimed to represent. Her supporters had gone silent. Even the moderator had given up trying to intervene. This was now just Ben Shapiro working through his binders, presenting fact after fact, building to a conclusion that seemed inevitable. He pulled out his final, thickest folder. Now, Congresswoman, we are going to tie all of this together with one fundamental question. Who do you actually represent? Who do you actually serve? Because when I think deeply, really deeply, about your record, about your statements, about your priorities, I come to a very troubling conclusion. He pulled out the video of her July 2019 speech to Somali Americans. Let's start with this. July 2019, speaking to a Somali-American audience in Minnesota. You're speaking in Somali. Professional translation. We are people who know they are Somali and Muslim first. Let me repeat that slowly. Somali and Muslim first. Not American, not American first. Somali and Muslim. Shapiro pulled out more quotes from the same speech. You continued, the state of Minnesota, the state government is us. It is ours. We, meaning Somali. Ours, meaning the Somali community has claimed Minnesota as their territory. You referred to the Somali government as our government in a possessive sense, and you told the audience that Minnesota's Somalis should be proud because they've achieved political power. He set down the transcript. Now, let's think deeply about what this means. You told a Somali audience that their primary identity is Somali and Muslim, not American. You told them that Minnesota's government belongs to them. You referred to Somalia's government as ours, and you encouraged them to see their political power in ethnic terms. Shapiro pulled out her voting record. Now, let's look at your actions through this lens. You've consistently voted against measures that would restrict immigration from Somalia, against enhanced vetting, against security measures. You've opposed designating Al-Shabaab, a Somali terrorist organization, as a high-priority threat, even though they've killed Americans. He flipped through pages rapidly. You've advocated for increased foreign aid to Somalia, millions of dollars. You've opposed oversight measures that would track where that money goes, even though Somalia is one of the most corrupt countries on earth. You've pushed for preferential treatment for Somali refugees, for expedited processing, for reduced scrutiny. Shapiro pulled out more documents. Meanwhile, American interests. You voted against defense funding, against military pay raises, against supporting our troops, against border security, against law enforcement funding, against measures to combat Chinese espionage, against supporting Taiwan, against punishing Iran for terrorism, against designating the Muslim Brotherhood as terrorists, against almost every measure that would strengthen American security or support American interests. He looked up from his papers. But Somalia? You're all in. Maximum aid, minimal oversight, preferential treatment for Somali immigrants. It's almost like, and stay with me while I think deeply about this, it's almost like you're representing Somalia's interests in the U.S. Congress, rather than representing Minnesota's 5th Congressional District. Shapiro pulled out her foreign travel records. Let's look at where you've traveled on other people's dime. Trips funded by outside organizations, which is legal if disclosed. Where have you gone? Somalia, multiple times. Qatar, which funds Hamas. Turkey, which oppresses Kurds and attacks our allies. Pakistan, which harbored Osama bin Laden for years. You visited countries that are hostile or ambivalent to American interests. You know where you haven't visited? Israel, our ally, Taiwan, Poland, the Baltic states worried about Russian aggression, South Korea, Japan, any of our actual allies. He pulled out funding sources for the trips. And who's paying for these trips? Organizations with questionable connections. The Qatar trip was funded by a group with ties to the Muslim Brotherhood. But you went anyway. You took their money. You visited their country. And you came back and voted in ways that benefit their interests. Shapiro's pace was at maximum now, words tumbling out with precision and passion. So let's connect all the dots at high speed. You told Somalis you're Somali and Muslim first, not American. You referred to Somalia's government as ours. You vote consistently for Somali interests and against American interests. You visit countries hostile to America while avoiding our allies. You take money from questionable foreign-linked organizations. You minimize 9/11 and can't condemn Islamic terrorism. You use anti-Semitic language about America's closest ally in the Middle East. You vote against American defense and security measures. And when questioned about your loyalty, you claim Islamophobia and victimhood. He walked to the center of the studio. Now, let me tell you about my family, because this is personal to me. My grandparents escaped Nazi Germany in 1937. They came to America with nothing. They didn't speak English. They struggled. They worked hard. But from day one, they were American. They loved this country because it saved them from annihilation. My grandfather served in World War II. He fought for America. My father raised me to believe that America is exceptional, that American values matter, that being American is about more than geography. It's about embracing freedom, individual liberty, and constitutional governance. Shapiro's voice became more intense. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I wear a yarmulke on national television. I keep Shabbat. I keep kosher. I maintain my religious and cultural identity, but I'm American first. When American interests conflict with any other consideration, I choose America. When Israel and America have different positions, I support America. My primary loyalty is to this country, to the Constitution, to American values. He turned to face Omar directly. You came to America as a refugee from Somalia, a failed state torn apart by Islamic extremism and clan warfare. You were in a refugee camp in Kenya. America took you in. We gave you safety, education, opportunity. We gave you everything. You went from a refugee camp to the United States Congress in one generation. That's the American dream. His voice rose. And how did you repay that? By telling Somali audiences you're Somali first, by voting against American interests, by minimizing 9/11, by using anti-Semitic language, by championing policies that got Americans killed, by enriching your family through campaign corruption, by consistently demonstrating that your primary loyalty is to Somalia and Islam, not to the country that saved your life. Shapiro pulled out the Constitution, held it up. When you were sworn into Congress, you placed your hand on a Quran, which is your right, and I defend that right. And you took an oath. You swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. You swore to bear true faith and allegiance to the United States, but you told Somalis you're Somali and Muslim first. So which is it, Congresswoman? Because you can't serve two masters. He set down the Constitution carefully. Facts don't care about your feelings about loyalty. The Constitution doesn't care about your ethnic identity. And the American people don't care about your excuses. When you represent Americans, you will need to be American first. Not Somali first, not Muslim first. American first. Shapiro pulled out letters from Somali American veterans. Let me read you something from Ahmed Hassan. He's a Somali refugee who came to America in 2004. He joined the U.S. Army. He served 2 tours in Afghanistan. He earned a Purple Heart. He now lives in Minneapolis, in your district. This is what he wrote. Shapiro read, Congresswoman Omar doesn't speak for me. When she says she's Somali first, that's her choice. But I'm American first. I love Somalia. It's where I was born. But America gave me freedom, opportunity, and safety. I served in the U.S. Army because I love this country. I'm proud to be American, and I'm embarrassed by a congresswoman who can't say the same thing. She makes people think Somali refugees aren't grateful, aren't loyal, aren't American. She's wrong. Most of us love this country. We just wish she did, too. Shapiro set down the letter, his voice becoming quieter but more intense. Ahmed Hassan is more American than you'll ever be, Congresswoman, because he understands what you don't. Being American isn't about where you're born. It's about what you believe. It's about values. It's about loyalty. And it's about putting America first. He pulled out his comprehensive notes for the final summary. So, let's review everything we've covered tonight. And let's think really, really deeply about who you are and what you represent. Shapiro began speaking at his characteristic rapid-fire pace, every word landing like a hammer blow. You possibly committed immigration fraud by marrying your brother, or definitely committed immigration fraud by marrying someone else for benefits. Either way, federal felony. You definitely committed tax fraud by filing jointly with one man while married to another, documented by Minnesota authorities. You've used anti-Semitic language repeatedly, invoking classic anti-Semitic tropes about Jewish money, dual loyalty, and hypnotic power, condemned by your own party. You minimized 9/11 to "some people did something" and can't clearly condemn Islamic terrorism without hedging. You told Somali audiences you are Somali and Muslim first, not American. You voted consistently against American interests while supporting Somali interests. You turned your campaign into a family enrichment scheme, paying your husband's firm $2.8 million for undocumented services. You championed defund police policies that caused crime surges and got people killed. You maintained expensive personal security while taking protection away from everyone else. You've traveled to countries hostile to America on questionable funding. And through all of this, when held accountable, you hide behind your identity and claim victimhood. He stopped. Let the comprehensive list hang in the air. That's not complexity, Congresswoman. That's not nuance. That's a pattern of potential criminality, definite corruption, demonstrated bigotry, questionable loyalty, and disastrous policy advocacy. And you want to lecture me about thinking deeply? Shapiro walked right up to her position, staring down at her. You told me to slow down and think deeper. So I did. I slowed down. I examined the evidence. I thought deeply about who you are and what you represent. And here's my conclusion. You're a fraud. You're possibly a criminal. You're definitely a bigot. You're absolutely corrupt. And you're fundamentally un-American. Not because of where you're from, but because of where your loyalties lie. His voice rose to a crescendo. Facts don't care about your feelings about any of this. The evidence doesn't care about your identity. The law doesn't care about your excuses. And the American people shouldn't tolerate a congresswoman who's made clear that her first loyalty is to Somalia, not America. Shapiro returned to his position, gathered all his binders. You criticized me for speaking too fast, for thinking too simply, for reducing complex issues to talking points. But you know what? Sometimes the truth is simple. Sometimes complexity is just a way to hide from facts. Sometimes speaking quickly is just efficient communication of extensive evidence. And sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one. You shouldn't be in Congress. Not because you're Muslim, not because you're black, not because you're an immigrant, but because you violated laws, spread bigotry, enriched yourself, championed disastrous policies, and demonstrated that your loyalty is to Somalia first, America second. He looked into the camera one final time. Facts don't care about your feelings. Evidence doesn't care about identity politics. And if you believe in accountability and loyalty to America, in the principle that elected officials should actually serve the country they represent, Share this everywhere. Tell everyone you know. Because this is what happens when ideology meets evidence, when confidence meets competence, when someone who thinks deeply dismantles someone who doesn't think at all. Shapiro closed his final binder with a decisive snap. Class dismissed, Congresswoman. I hope you learned something about the importance of facts, evidence, and loyalty. Though based on your record, I doubt it. The studio was absolutely silent. Omar sat frozen. Her face a mixture of shock, humiliation, and rage. She'd walked into this debate confident, prepared to discuss policy differences between capitalism and socialism, ready to promote her vision of democratic socialism and economic justice. She'd mocked Shapiro for speaking too fast and thinking too simply, believing she could intellectually dominate him. Instead, she had been systematically destroyed. Every aspect of her record examined and found wanting. Every defense demolished with documented evidence. Every attempt at deflection cut off with facts. 90 minutes of pure, unrelenting accountability backed by binders full of receipts. The moderator tried to give her a chance to respond. Congresswoman Omar, would you like to address any of Mr. Shapiro's points? She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Nothing coherent came out. She shuffled through her notes, frantically looking for talking points. But what could she say? Everything Shapiro presented was documented. Her own words, her own votes, her own financial filings, public records, professional translations, ethics committee reports, crime statistics, all of it verified, sourced, undeniable. This is clearly a partisan attack, she finally managed, her voice shaking, based on Islamophobia, on racism, on a congresswoman. Shapiro interrupted, his voice sharp. I'm an Orthodox Jew who wears a kippah on national television. I receive death threats daily from actual anti-Semites and Islamists. I face real bigotry. You're not being attacked for your identity. You're being held accountable for your actions. I cited your own financial reports, your own statements, your own voting record. If presenting your own record is Islamophobic, then reality has an Islamophobia problem. She tried again. You're taking things out of context. I read full speeches. I provided complete quotes. I gave extensive context. The context makes everything worse, not better. One more desperate attempt. This is a distraction from real issues. The real issues are potential criminality, documented corruption, bigotry, disastrous policies, and divided loyalty, Shapiro shot back. We just spent 90 minutes on the realest issues imaginable. Omar stood abruptly, gathered her papers with shaking hands, and walked out. Didn't wait to be dismissed. Didn't make a closing statement. Just left. Her squad supporters scrambling after her, the cameras capturing every moment of her retreat. The studio erupted. Conservative audience members stood and applauded, not mockingly, but in genuine appreciation for what they'd just witnessed. Even some progressives looked shaken, thoughtful, troubled by the evidence they'd heard. Shapiro just sat quietly organizing his binders, looking like he'd just finished a particularly thorough Supreme Court oral argument. Within 8 minutes, #FactsDon'tCare was trending #1 globally on Twitter. Within an hour, clips had 15 million views. By the end of the night, 127 million people had watched at least some portion of the debate. It became the most-watched political programming in television history. Every major outlet had to cover it. CNN tried to spin it as controversial, but couldn't get around the documented evidence. MSNBC called it troubling, but had to acknowledge the facts. Fox News played it on loop for 3 days straight. Conservative outlets called it the greatest political debate performance ever recorded. But the real impact went deeper than media coverage. The next morning, a moderate Democrat named Sarah Johnson announced a primary challenge to Omar. Johnson was a former prosecutor, daughter of Somali immigrants who came legally and loved America unequivocally. Her announcement speech was simple. "I love Somalia, where my parents were born. But I love America more, the country that gave us everything. And Minnesota's 5th District deserves a representative who loves America first." Within the first week, Johnson raised $4.2 million, more than Omar raised in her entire first campaign. Donations poured in from across the country, from conservatives who'd never vote for a Democrat, but wanted Omar gone, from moderate Democrats embarrassed by her extremism, from Jewish Americans exhausted by her anti-Semitism, from Somali Americans who felt she misrepresented them, from 9/11 families who couldn't forgive "some people did something," from police families angry about defund policies. The polling was catastrophic for Omar. Her approval rating in her district dropped 38 points in 2 weeks. Her unfavorables skyrocketed to 67%. Even in heavily Somali precincts, Johnson was competitive. Ahmed Hassan and others like him weren't alone in being embarrassed by Omar's lack of American patriotism. Democratic leadership saw the writing on the wall. They'd protected Omar for years, afraid of accusations of Islamophobia if they held her accountable. But Shapiro, an Orthodox Jew who'd faced real anti-Semitism his entire life, had done what they couldn't. He'd held her accountable using only documented evidence, making it impossible to hide behind identity politics. Nancy Pelosi privately asked Omar to step back from high-profile positions. When she refused, the Democratic leadership stripped her from the Foreign Affairs Committee, citing the need for members who demonstrate clear loyalty to American interests. Even squad members started distancing themselves. AOC made vague supportive statements but never mentioned Omar by name. Rashida Tlaib was suddenly very busy with local issues. Ayanna Pressley had scheduling conflicts. The criminal investigations intensified. The FBI opened a formal investigation into the marriage allegations. The IRS expanded its inquiry into her tax filings. The House Ethics Committee reopened its campaign finance investigation with a more aggressive approach. Federal prosecutors began examining whether she'd committed immigration fraud, tax fraud, or campaign finance violations. Her media appearances dried up completely. Cable news stopped booking her. The Shapiro debate had exposed her too thoroughly. Even friendly outlets became wary. Podcasts and speaking engagements canceled. Universities that had invited her rescinded offers. She'd become toxic. 18 months after the debate, Ilhan Omar lost her primary to Sarah Johnson by 31 points. It wasn't even close. Her district had seen enough. They wanted someone who understood economics, who clearly opposed anti-Semitism, who unequivocally loved America, who put constituents before ideology. Omar is no longer in Congress. She does occasional commentary for fringe progressive outlets, small podcasts, YouTube channels with diminishing audiences. She lives modestly now. No luxury apartment, no Tesla, no designer clothes. She experienced downward mobility in real time, learning what her socialist policies would have done to millions of Americans. Her memoir was quietly canceled. The documentary about her was shelved. She became a cautionary tale taught in political science courses. What happens when ideology meets evidence? When victimhood narratives meet accountability? When someone unprepared debates someone over-prepared? And Ben Shapiro? He's still doing his show, still debating, still speaking at 300 words per minute. The debate became the most watched episode of his podcast ever. But more importantly, it became a masterclass taught in communication courses. How preparation defeats arrogance. How facts defeat feelings. How evidence-based argumentation destroys ideology. Law schools use it to teach oral advocacy. Business schools use it to teach negotiation tactics. Political campaigns use it to train candidates on what happens when you're not prepared. It's been viewed over 400 million times across all platforms. But the real legacy is simpler. Shapiro proved that facts still matter, that evidence still matters, that you can hold politicians accountable for their records without resorting to ad hominem attacks, that identity politics can't shield you from documented truth, and that sometimes speaking quickly and thinking clearly is exactly what's needed. It took 14 seconds for Ilhan Omar to make the fatal mistake. 14 seconds of dismissive condescension. Maybe if you spoke slower and thought deeper, you'd understand complexity beyond your simplistic worldview. 14 seconds that revealed she'd fundamentally misunderstood who she was dealing with. She thought rapid speech indicated shallow thinking. She thought her confidence could substitute for competence. She thought attacking his style could deflect from her substance or lack thereof. She was catastrophically wrong. What followed was 90 minutes of the most thorough political dismantling in modern history. Not through shouting or theatrics. Not through personal attacks or low blows. Through documentation. Through evidence. Through systematic presentation of her own record, her own words, her own actions. Shapiro didn't destroy Ilhan Omar's career that night. She'd destroyed it herself through years of potentially criminal behavior, documented corruption, obvious bigotry, disastrous policies, and divided loyalty. Shapiro just organized the evidence, presented it clearly, and let the facts speak for themselves. Because facts don't care about your feelings. They don't care about your identity. They don't care about your excuses or your deflections or your claims of victimhood. Facts are stubborn things. And when someone comes prepared with binders full of them, speaking at 300 words per minute, with the precision of a Harvard Law graduate and the moral clarity of someone who actually loves America, well, ideology doesn't stand a chance. The debate taught America several lessons. That preparation beats arrogance every time. That speaking quickly isn't the same as thinking shallowly. That evidence defeats narrative. That documentation destroys deflection. That you can hold people accountable without being cruel. That facts really don't care about feelings. And that loyalty to America should be the bare minimum requirement for serving in Congress. Ben Shapiro didn't just win a debate that night. He reminded America that truth exists, that it can be documented, and that when someone questions your thinking, the best response is to prove them wrong with an avalanche of facts delivered at maximum velocity. 14 seconds to make a mistake, 90 minutes to pay for it, and a career ended not by politics or prejudice, but by the simplest thing in the world, the documented truth. If you believe facts matter more than feelings, if you think evidence should trump ideology, if you're tired of politicians who hide behind victimhood while committing documented violations, if you want to see accountability in action, share this story everywhere. Share it with everyone who needs to see what happens when someone prepared meets someone pretentious. Share it with everyone who's tired of political correctness protecting the corrupt. Share it with everyone who believes America deserves representatives who love America first. Because this is what accountability looks like. This is what happens when facts meet feelings, and facts win decisively. This is what happens when someone who speaks at 300 words per minute brings 47,000 words of documented evidence to dismantle someone who thought condescension could substitute for a defense. Facts don't care about your feelings. Evidence doesn't care about your identity. And the American people don't have to tolerate representatives who put other countries first. Ben Shapiro didn't just defeat Ilhan Omar. He reminded us that truth still exists, that it can be proven, and that it ultimately triumphs over ideology. That's not thinking simply. That's thinking clearly. And it's beautiful.